going. We're good.
Now I'll call the Budget Committee to order on June 8th at 7 p.m. in the Aldermanic Chamber. If the clerk would please call the roll.
Alderman Wilshire.
Here.
Alderman McCarthy.
Present.
Alderman O'Brien is not here. Alderman Shoneman, I am here. Alderman Siegel.
Present.
Alderman McGinnis is not here. Alderman Dowd is not here. Also in attendance is Mayor Donchis and Alderman Clemmons and Mr. Griffin, City CFO.
Thank you very much. Public comment? Seeing no one, we'll move right along. Communications.
There are none.
Wrap-up session. Okay. Here we are. After weeks and weeks of combing through the budget, tonight is wrap-up. So I'm going to open up the floor, and anyone have questions, want to make motions? I'll take Alderman Siegel, then Alderman Clemmons.
Alderman Clemmons.
Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. I put in a question today to Mr. Griffin, and the question was, how many, well, let me just pull it up here on my phone, actually, because it was a series of questions. And so what I asked was, how many people in the budget are being laid off? What departments are they from? What is the cost breakdown of each position? And what are the individual line items? And so I guess I would direct my questions to Mr. Griffin to see if he has an answer on that yet.
Are you prepared to answer that, Mr. Griffin?
Certainly.
Thank you. You got the floor.
On the city side of the ledger, there are no layoffs in this budget as presented. Certainly some attrition items, but not straight layoffs where an individual is severed. I reached out to Chief Operating Officer Daniel Donovan over at the school, and he responded accordingly. The school district budget does result in a few layoffs. We will be laying off a curriculum supervisor. This results in a budget reduction of $77,000 from the full-time wages line. We will also be reducing the custodial staff by 9 full-time equivalents. This will result in individuals losing their jobs though about half of them were told when they were hired in fiscal 2017 that the positions were not going to be budgeted in the fiscal 18 budget. The only 2 people that have been in the district for more than 8 months that are losing their jobs are 2 part-time custodians. They are losing their jobs per the existing contract language. The budget reduction for all of these positions comes from the full-time wages line and will total approximately $350,000.
Does that include the 77,000?
You'd have to add the $350,000 to the 77.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Alderman Clemmons.
And so that throughout the entire budget, those are the only ones that are nowhere else?
Correct.
Okay. That was my question, and for me, I will only support this budget if those jobs are saved. Otherwise, my vote will be no. I'm not on the budget committee, but I was curious to find out what what we were doing. The sad thing is that we have a budget that is spending millions of dollars more over last year, and yet we're laying people off, and I don't feel comfortable with that. I think that our custodial staff does an excellent job. I think that they're needed in the school. I don't think that, I don't think that we're getting rid of superfluous positions. And from what I've heard, the curriculum supervisor position is also a necessary role. I understand that part of the part of the issue is that putting money back to the school side doesn't require them to spend the money the way that we wish they would. But I've also put some thought into how we could perhaps persuade them. And my suggestion would be to add the $350,000 and the $77,000 as a rider to the budget that says, in addition to whatever the final number is on the budget, the Board of Aldermen will transfer said amount for these positions with a majority vote of the school board approving them for said certain things. Now, some folks would say that that is dictating to the Board of Education what they can do with the money. I, however, take the opinion that no, it is simply asking for a majority vote for them to say whether or not they will accept the funds that we want to give them in that particular case. And like anything else, once that money comes over to them, they can vote to spend it differently. So I would suggest that this committee do that and let the Board of Education be the ones to decide whether or not they're going to lay people off or and defer it back to them.
The mayor and then Brian? All set, Brian?
First, may I just interject and acknowledge that Alderman McGinnis arrived at 7:05?
Sorry I'm late.
That's all right. I'm glad to see you here.
Thank you. Alderman McCarthy?
We've actually tried that exact thing before. I put money back in the contingency account to pay for curriculum in a year when it had been cut out of the budget. And it was held to be in violation of our separation of powers from the school board. So I believe that they can get the money and use it for whatever they choose after we have done that. And I think they have made it quite clear they're not going to restore those positions.
Alderman Clemmons?
Well, that's precisely what I've said, is that the initial, we would require an initial vote to say whether or not they wanted that cash or not. If they don't want it, then they can vote no. If they want it, then they can, and they want those positions back, then they can vote yes. And to me, that is not subverting their powers in any way, because once the money goes on to their side of the ledger, they can vote differently. They can change their minds and say, well, actually, we're not going to restore those custodians. We're going to do something else with it. And that is also within their power. But in order to get it, they would have to vote in favor. I don't believe, because they can move the money after the fact, I don't think it would be a violation of state law.
Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I'm you can't hear me, it's because I have a cold. Now, to some degree, we've done that already. I mean, the budget proposed by Superintendent Brown was a 1.3% increase, and it involved some various changes and reductions. Among them, moving Clearway into, closing Clearway, moving that program into the city, and that would be at a savings of $350,000. Number two, cutting the teacher coaches, and number three, cutting the custodians, were among the changes that she made in order to accomplished what she wanted to accomplish, which includes full-day kindergarten, at a 1.3% increase. After hearing from the community and from Alderman Clemmons on the issue of the custodians, I told them I would go along with 1.9%, which would provide them sufficient funds, 350, which is around 600,000 difference, 350 for the for Clearway, leave that open, because it has functioned so effectively for the community and for 20 years, and the Adult Learning Center has run it very effectively for that entire period of time. Number two, to restore the teaching coaches, 2 people, 100,000 or a little bit more, because I thought that would enable younger teachers, more junior teachers, to realize their full potential, and without sufficient training, they may never get there. They may never be able to accomplish what they could accomplish for the kids. And number 3, the money for the 10 custodians. Money for the 10 money for 5 of the 10 custodians, because after talking with Mr. Donovan, it seemed like 5 of the positions would probably go by attrition. So in order to avoid layoffs, I put the rest of that 600,000 there, based on the idea that that we do need to worry about the way these buildings are cared for. Alderman Clemmons had made the point about the layoffs. I thought that was a good point. And so to kind of propose a compromise with the school board to avoid layoffs, I put enough money in there to take care of, to keep the custodians that we have, allowing them to make some changes but not to lay anybody off. And they didn't use the money that way. And, you know, it's hard to do anything about that because we do not have line item authority. So I believe that if you pass the budget, I mean, they've given us their budget. They can still spend it however they want. They don't have to spend it even according to the budget they've given us. But we did, I think I did include enough money in the budget for them to accomplish those 3 objectives. Number 1, Clearway. Number 2, the teaching coaches. And number 3, at least 5 of the 10 custodians, so that no layoffs would result. And they did some of that, but they didn't do all of it. But I just wanted to make that clear. And I would say this, that I'm hoping that we can pass the budget with as many votes as possible for various reasons, because, and therefore, I would hope that Alderman Clemmons would reconsider his vote and give us the biggest majority we can get in passing whatever budget is recommended by the Budget Committee.
Alderman Siegel? And then Alderman-
I'll defer to Alderman Clemmons for a follow-up, and then I will say my piece.
Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. Yes, Mayor, you did an excellent job, and you did the right thing in regards to going back to the school board and telling them, you know, that it's important to keep this workforce the way that it is. And I thanked you before, and I'll thank you again for doing that. And, you know, it's a shame that they decided that this wasn't, that the upkeep of the schools isn't important to them. And it makes me wonder why I should spend money on bonding for new things to the schools. Because if we're not going to keep our schools up by maintaining them, by having people in there to clean the facilities and to make sure that things are running well, why should I vote as an alderman for construction projects? Why not just let the schools go to heck? I won't do that because I care about this city. But, you know, it makes me wonder, how much does the school board care about this city? especially when the mayor makes the point that he went to them with this proposal. And, you know, I understand the need to pass the budget with a large majority. But, you know, I have to sleep at night. And I can't do it knowing that my vote laid some people off. Now, if what you're alluding to is that the city might lose a lawsuit that is out there because of the spending cap, that's a problem that was created in 1995, and I couldn't vote then. So, and I might mention, you ran on the spending cap. So, we'll leave it at that.
Alderman Siegel.
You know, I have so many things going through my head, so I apologize if I may come off somewhat scrambled here. I actually am very empathetic with Alderman Clemens's feelings towards our custodial staff. I've been public about that. But there is the serious possibility of us, in fact, instead of laying off some people that are with the city less than a year, others by attrition, we lay off enormous amounts of people, seriously important people. That can actually happen. And and if you want to lose sleep at night, that's a very serious consideration. I understand where you're coming from. The school board absolutely will not care if you want them to spend the money that way. They will not do it. So it's a quixotic attempt, an honorable attempt. And you and I don't agree on many things. We do agree on this, but I'm trying to be a pragmatist, and I'm really trying to look at what's going on here. And your vote against the budget for that reason, while an honorable reason, is a catastrophe. And I'm not going to make light of it. It's catastrophic. It has the potential to be a catastrophe. Now, right now, there's one element in the budget that there's one motion, as far as I know, outstanding, which was to take the $200,000 for the Citizens Fund, which again was well-meaning, and I think the mayor has made a good case for the fact that it wasn't extra money. It was just partitioning existing money in a different way. And I made a motion at one of the committee meetings, which passed, to put that into the police expendable trust fund for overtime, which I think everybody all around the horseshoe, for the most part, would agree is critically important. That trust fund is almost at zero, and clearly the criminals have not decided to say, oh, looks like we've run out of money, I guess we'll take a break now. It's a huge problem, and it's an insolvable problem for the police department if we expect to have coverage. And I'm not talking about routine coverage. I'm talking about basic coverage, okay? So in light of that, in light of the consequences and what it means and the sleeping at night, and again, I am empathetic, but the consequences are just so much more enormous, so much more heinously bad on the other side of the ledger, that I literally am begging you to reconsider your thoughts, honorable as though they may be. The implications of what you're saying are very, very, very bad for a whole lot of reasons. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
Alderman McCarthy and then Alderman.
I just wanted to clarify, I thought we had passed two motions.
We did.
One was transferring the 200,000 to the interfund transfers, and the other was reinstating in the citywide communications. the 191,000.
I apologize, that's right.
Yeah.
I apologize, Alderman McCarthy.
Alderman Shoneman.
Thank you. Want to weigh in on the issue of layoffs. I agree with you in many respects, in much of what you say. And I appreciate the fact that you don't want to lose sleep at night. It sounds like you probably do at times. I do too. And it's hard. It's hard. At the same time, though, I think that we're in a situation where we need to be striving for increased efficiencies. I attended some of the meetings of the Strategic Planning Committee, and one of the things that's come out of there, one of the goals is efficiencies. A lot of people said it. I've only been at 2 meetings. I'm not a voting member on that committee, but a lot of people have talked about efficiency. And efficiency just doesn't mean, turning off the lights when you leave the room. It means doing the most we can with the labor that we have. And if we don't want to be in jeopardy, and I'm not saying that we are, but if we don't want to be in jeopardy of becoming a jobs program, we need to very wisely manage our labor. I've had jobs, I've been laid off from jobs. It's never fun. And it's a very painful experience for all. I think it's hard. It's very, very hard. But in some respects, I think that we have, in some areas, we have too many people. We have more people than are required. I will just cite what the school department said about the all-day kindergarten. They found 10 teachers whose presence in those classrooms was not critical enough for them to stay there, that they could pull them out somewhere else. And it makes me wonder, if they found 10, are there 11? Or are there 12 or more? And I just don't think that we can go down the road as a city spending taxpayer money, becoming a program that really wants to guarantee jobs as our primary goal. Secondly, I want to address your comments about supporting or not supporting the budget. I don't plan on supporting the budget either, maybe for somewhat different reasons. But I appreciate very much your stance regarding spending cap. I do not share Alderman Siegel's view that it is necessarily catastrophic if we have to work through all of these lines and figure out what we're going to really spend our money on. If somehow this court case, Mr. T-Moon, prevails. I look at things like the paving bond. We got 13 votes. That's wise spending, and we got it easily. We did the school roofs a couple weeks ago. 15 votes. I don't think anyone voted against that. Wise spending. Not spending that I'm wild about, and maybe other people aren't either, but it's wise and necessary. And I think that if we were forced into that situation, I think we would figure out where the priorities are, what to do to make this work. How you decide to vote, what you decide to do, or anybody decides to do on the budget ultimately is, personal decision, hopefully in the best interest of our constituents. I won't be supporting it either. I did support that amendment, those 2 amendments, but once we do that, that makes the budget a 10-vote budget anyway, so I don't think those things might be hard to get through. But it's not necessarily catastrophic. I think that some wise decisions could come out of it, and I share the desire of wanting to sleep at night. Thanks.
Alderman Siegel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, if it's so easy to do, where are the cuts? Tell us. Where are you going to take the people? Because it's people, there's a lot of stuff that's not cuttable. It's not like we can do it across the board. So certainly, let's say that there's, quote, some waste. I think we've looked at the budget fairly carefully, and I think we all appreciate that we have some fairly tight, well-run departments. No doubt about it. So let's assume that the police department is very well run. We certainly want to have that intact. I think NFR, certainly. And I'm not disparaging any of the other departments. I'm just walking through various departments. DPW, I know absolutely is not wasting resources. So certainly the other departments, financial services, welfare, health, there's not much there, certainly. I mean, and it's efficient. So it's one thing that you might be able to look at, right? It'd be the school department, potentially. And I'm not singling them out as the wasteful child. They are the biggest part of the budget. But here's the problem. You don't get to do anything with that. You can cut all of the money out of the school department, which I obviously don't agree with, and you have no idea what will be cut or what the outcomes will be. None. We have no authority there. Zero. We just say, okay, here's your box. It's a heck of a lot smaller. Now, do you believe that the constituents of Nashua, your constituents, a great majority of them, would think that that would be acceptable, or that businesses looking to locate into Nashua, and it does make a difference, and real estate agents trying to sell property in Nashua would look at that and say, that makes sense? I mean, I understand the idea of, well, you know, we'll just kind of make these cuts. But those levels seriously are not there. You know, you can have a here and there thing, and we're talking about, you know, some custodians who are junior custodians getting laid off. And I applaud the school department for basically saving most of the jobs, especially for the senior people. I mean, it was really terrible to hear about guys that, you know, they're like a year away from vesting their pensions or something when, after all those years, and they might have been gone. That's not okay because they don't get Social Security, right? As far as I know, maybe I'm wrong on that. But, excuse me. But that's the problem here, is that there's no solution to that. I'm a pragmatist. I try to be a little bit, I'm concerned about spending, but I try to look at it holistically and say, okay, what are the trade-offs? I mean, everybody's made good points, and I don't want to single anyone out, but tell me where and how you do it.
Alderman Shoreman.
Thank you. Again, I have a lot of sympathy for anyone who's going to potentially get laid off. I think that if that were to come to pass, I think that we'd take a look at the things that need to be done and things that could be optional. And we have to set priorities. I would start with things like the pension fund increase. It sounds like we have to pay it, so it automatically goes in there. I talked to Mr. Boudreau about the benefits package, the benefits cost increase. I think something needs to be done there. I'm not sure that it has to be the full 3.6, because in years past, apparently these same agencies made recommendations that we did not follow. Now, I understand that the fund has been running down. Is 10 million the right number? Could it be 8? I don't know. But we're doing 3.6 in there. Maybe that could be half. I don't know. If we take a look at police and fire, I think public safety is a very high priority. I said it the other night, I think infrastructure is a very high priority. I think those departments are probably pretty tightly run. I don't have an example of where something could come out of that. I mentioned the elementary school teachers, just running through the numbers. I'm not an administrator in schools. I just ran through the numbers. They found 10 teachers without violating any of the state mandates or the union contract mandates. I went through those same classrooms, just elementary school, and I found 35 more teachers. Not saying they all have to go, but 35 more positions in addition to the 10 that could be pulled without violating the union contract, which is more stringent than the state numbers. Now, again, maybe those numbers, maybe that's too large a number. Maybe it doesn't have to be that large. And I didn't move students around between schools or anything. We heard the other night that there was some movement of students between schools. But without doing any of that, I found 35 more positions that didn't violate that. If we consider the all-up salary of about $89,000, I'm not sure exactly what the number is, that's $3 million for those in addition to the 10. Regarding the all-day kindergarten, I have no opposition to all-day kindergarten. I've spoken here about process a lot, and I'm not 100% sure that we have fully vetted that the way that we should. I'm concerned that we didn't do some of the things, follow some of the steps that maybe should have been followed, that would have normally been followed in a normal course of events, except we seem to be pressed for time, and it seemed to be something that we just have to do. Anytime we get pushed into something that we seemingly have to do, the potential exists to make a mistake. I think I would probably hold off on that for a year. And then that means that it's not 10, but it's 40, not 10 or 35, but 45 teachers who are potentially beyond the numbers that we need to maintain those union contract numbers. Now, I understand the attracting people to the city, all of that. And I think that our conversations would be about where are we going to find what from which piece. And I think that it would be a lot of give and take, and it wouldn't be easy. It would not be easy. And I expect that in the end, we would be over the spending cap. And I'm prepared to do that. I'm not prepared to, I don't like the idea that we moved the sewer fund out to accomplish it with the 8 votes. I don't think that was right, personally. But I think that if we ended up with a budget that was higher than what was allowed by the original spending cap number, I think that given what we would actually put into that budget, I could probably support that. Again, we don't know what that would look like. But I think the possibility exists. I think that that's what we're supposed to be here to do. We often talk about making difficult decisions. Those are the difficult decisions. They are. They're not easy. But I think that's the road we go down.
Mayor?
Well, first on the issue of all-day kindergarten, full-day kindergarten, we already have it in 5 schools. If the governor is pushing for this, for the funding, to, at some level, to provide additional education assistance for those communities that have full-day kindergarten, and if the bill that passed the House about last week, linking Keno to $1,100 per kid, were to pass the Senate, by adopting full-day kindergarten, we would realize hundreds of thousands of dollars, and really, given the cuts or changes that have been made, enough to offset any additional costs, which really don't exist anyway because of those cuts. So we by implementing it now, we can really realize a benefit that we hadn't been counting on up to now, if that passes. Number 2, I don't think that the T-Boom Moriarty lawsuit is going to be successful. I certainly, as a matter of principle, disagree with the approach of the T-Boom Moriarty lawsuit of trying to resolve the city's budget in the courts. It's just, I just don't agree that we should have a lawsuit or that aldermen should be suing the city. But at least, and another problem I have with some of the people who have expressed opposition is, as Alderman Siegel said, they never tell us what they would want to cut. Now, I respect Alderman Schoeneman's remarks because at least he's telling us, well, maybe we should cut 35 teachers. Okay, that's a choice. Now, I think it's a choice that would have consequences, but at least he's saying what he might do, which is more than we're getting from the other people. All we get is a lawsuit. Now, there are costs of cutting 35 teachers because class size is a significant issue in terms of educational quality. So were we to cut 35 teachers, class sizes would go up. With the 10, there's a marginal increase. There's no question about it in other elementary grades. But some of those offsets are also at higher than elementary grades. But there's some impact on class size, but the judgment was made that a class size, a slight increase was worth that trade-off was worth the benefit of full-day kindergarten. If we went further and cut off, if we, the school board, the city, cut off 35 teachers, yeah, it would have a significant impact. I mean, the number of kids that have to be in a classroom for there to be a contractual violation is very high. And they're trying to keep class sizes around, 20 in the low 20s to make sure that every kid can get a quality education in the first 3 grades especially. Now, we're all trying to save money. We all want to have the lowest tax rate possible, but we have to make our own judgments as to how that, how we balance the ability to pay with the net necessity for services that we're trying to deliver. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of stuff I'd like to do that's not in the budget. Love to have things that I think there are things that would benefit the city that aren't in the budget because we can't afford them. Anyway, so at least Alderman Schoeneman's telling us what he might do, and I think that would it would have a big impact. But at least he's got the courage of his convictions. And, excuse me, that's all I have to say at the moment. In fact, I can't really speak much further.
Alderman Clemmons and then Alderman Stagel. And you.
I have a question for anyone who might know. Over the last 10, 15 years, how many times has the city, one, gone over the spending cap, but more importantly, two, how many times has the city passed a budget that was under the spending cap, and by how much? Like, what would it total if we had to, like, ballpark guess?
I'd have to defer to CFO Griffin.
Yeah, if we recall from the budget summit, November 10th, 2016, from 1999 to 2006, there was, first thing out of the gate was what's referred to as an all-in debt exclusion and capital exclusion. So for most of Mayor Streeter's tenure, he basically, with the building of the two high schools, it was a must-have. He excluded the debt. Budgets passed 12-3, 11-4, 13-2, things of that nature. Since 2007, each and every budget was under the spending cap. Back then, spending cap percentages were 3.5%, 3%, something like that. The most recent budgets, as I explained last week, there was $100,000 left under one budget proposal. We put $50,000, $55,000 in for additional first-year officer. This year, there's $100,000 under the cap, but during the past 9 years, there's probably somewhere between six to 7 million, subject to check, that's been left under the cap.
So, thank you for that.
Could I just follow up on that? I don't think that characterization does justice to what actually happened. And a lot of the cases in the Streeter administration were things like, in order to pay off part of the debt service on the high school from the school capital reserve fund, we had to dissolve the fund and then reappropriate the money that was left over back into the fund, which meant we overrode the budget cap by millions of dollars. But those millions of dollars simply moved into the fund balance and back. They had no impact on the tax rate. So it wasn't, I think the number of times we have excluded debt to the benefit of the bottom line of the budget is probably zero since the start of the Streeter administration. It was done a few times way back. Many of the budgets have been just under the cap. So I suspect that the standard, if you went and looked at it, we'd wind up with a number that was within $1 million, perhaps $2 million of the historical value of the cap over those years.
Alderman Clemmons?
So, basically, we have, and I understand what you're saying, Alderman McCarthy. So, essentially, we have, in those cases, a lot of times during the Streeter years, those were simply they were net neutral as far as the cap goes. So whatever the budget was that passed was actually probably under the limit, and I understand that. But even taking from 2007 and on, $6 or $7 million, I think, is what you said, and that there we go. We've saved the citizens $6 or $7 million since 2007 by not going all the way to the top of where we could have gone. And so, had we done that, I don't think we would be in a situation this year where we're worried that, a lawsuit's going to prevail and suddenly we're going to have to cut the budget. My point being that it's time to recognize the fact that we are a very fiscally responsible city. We don't overspend. We don't have, and I, contrary to what some folks have said, I don't believe that there is a position in this city that the person isn't warranted in that job. I don't believe that. If anything, I think we're understaffed in a lot of places. You know, we have an urban school district. I don't think that teachers get enough support. I understand what's been said about, you know, the catastrophic nature of what would happen if that lawsuit prevailed. And I get that. And that is a consideration for me. But, you know, it's something we should have been thinking about for a very long time. And, you know, every year we would come under the budget. We'd come under the spending cap, I mean, and we would, you know, oh, that's great, we're under the spending cap. But no, never does anybody ever recognize that on a cumulative basis of how much money we actually have saved people. And now it's time for us to get together and spend a little bit more money of that savings because we have to. The city needs the dollars that we are spending in the budget. And what I am proposing here is to spend a little bit more so that we can keep people employed, jobs that are important to the school district. And I understand that they had the opportunity to do that and they didn't do it. And who knows, maybe they won't, maybe they'll take that extra $400,000 or so and, you know, I don't know, maybe they'll use it for something else instead of keeping those employees. But I think that would be, an awful shame if we were to do that. So my suggestion would be to just add that money back in to this bottom line of the school board, make it clear that this is what the Board of Aldermen would like the school board to spend the money on, and shame on them if they don't.
Alderman Siegel.
Thank you. Again, I apologize because this is just very disheartening. So, a couple of things. In my first term, we did go through the exercise at length. Alderman Dean and I literally locked ourselves in my basement for 3 straight days and went line by line over every element of the budget and looked statistically and said, well, what might be overfunded and what might not be. And we came up with, I think, $550,000 worth of cuts, and that was the year that we wanted to retain the police. And so Mayor Lozo wanted to get rid of some police officers and some principals. We were able to put those back and still come under the budget. But I can tell you categorically, having gone through that exercise in excruciating detail, it's gone. All that low-hanging, slightly overfunded funds, they don't exist anymore. And ironically, the way the spending cap mechanics work is that in a way you have to be actively discouraged from doing exactly what we did, which is constructive, because you screw yourself for the next year when you think you need the flexibility in low rate of inflation times, which is horrible, which is completely ridiculous, but in fact is a consequence. The other thing I might point out is we did have an alternate mechanism to fund some of the obligations, which was proposed in legislation to move the money out of the contingency that was specifically earmarked for the pension obligation. It would have had no impact on tax rate. None. We voted against it. That was a solution. But that wasn't good enough. And here we are. And that wasn't good enough, but now, hey, let's look at even deeper. And I can tell you that if the school boards has to cut stuff, you know what's going to get cut? It's definitely going to be the custodians, and a hell of a lot more, and Clearway. Now, I went to the public hearing for the school board budget, and I'm pretty glad I did, because that was the hearing that restored Clearway. Now, I actually went in there thinking, Clearway, you got to be kidding me. This seems like an easy cut, because I had no idea. Until I sat there and listened to the people who basically would end their lives, and they weren't being dramatic. These were children with serious problems, and Clearway was the way that they could survive and cope and come out of a dark place successfully. That's going to disappear. That absolutely will disappear. And I don't mean to be overly dramatic, but damn it, you know, you want to stand on ceremony for a few jobs. I understand the thinking, but damn it, you know, the other implications are beyond horrendous. Think broader. This damn board couldn't even pass a piece of legislation that was taxpayer consequence neutral. Taxpayer consequence freaking neutral. Because, let's gotta waive, and I'm not referring to any of my colleagues here. Wave hands, I'm for the taxpayer. Even though that had nothing to do with being for the taxpayer. I'm so frustrated by that. I'm sorry. That makes no sense to me. That's it. Thank you.
Alderman Shoneman.
Thank you. I appreciate Alderman Siegel's frustration. I was one of those who voted against it, and really because it was another way around a spending cap. By taking that out, it inflates what you can spend, and I don't approve of that. You heard me say before that if we have to do the pension fund, we do the pension fund. You heard me say a few minutes ago that I'd vote for an override of the spending cap if required. But I just think we should face it as for what it is, not doing something over here and then having an effect over here. It's just the way that I viewed it, and if I viewed it wrong, well, I've told you what I'd be willing to do. Secondly, I know a lot of conversations were happening here. The numbers that I went through, first off, you spoke about Clearway. I fully support Clearway. I think that's a great program, and I don't want to see that cut. But again, we can't tell them. If we were to take enough money to fund some teachers out of this budget, as an example, they would do what they wanted with it. And maybe their goal is to keep as many teachers as possible. The only reason I even went through this exercise is because the school board said, hey, here's 10 teachers that aren't needed in the classroom that can be used somewhere else. They didn't say it last year. Were there 8 last year out of those 10? Or even more? Who knows? They didn't say it. So the fact that they didn't say it last year, they didn't find them last year until there was some place to put them, makes me wonder, why not? And are we just funding something that keeps people employed? And I like people being employed. It's important to be employed. Regarding the numbers, what I did, I'm not bumping up against the limits. I just went through an exercise of said, well, here's a classroom with 98 students and 5 teachers. What happens if you take one out? Do you hit the limit? No, you don't. Okay, that's one. And then, there can be a discussion about, well, this classroom needs more, that classroom doesn't. Again, I didn't move anybody around to try to make it fit even better. One other thing that I think that we could do, I didn't mention before, just to put it out there, is I took a look at some of the contingency for negotiations. It's $2.1 million, I think. That's a big number. We don't necessarily, in this budget committee, rubber stamp contracts that come in. If we have this issue, we have to be prepared. I think we can be prepared to not approve contracts, every contract that comes through, and maybe the $2.1 million is too much. Thank you.
Alderman McCarthy and then Alderman Siegel.
Yeah, I have a lot of the same frustration as Alderman Siegel. Our budget, even having kept it below the cap for years on end, let's face it, the problem we're facing this year is this $15 million that's under the cap that shouldn't be in the city budget at all because of the downshifting of the pension expenses. That was not anticipated when the cap was written. The cap said, it's logical, and this is debatable because of growth, but it's logical that services will inflate at about the rate of inflation. That's fine. When somebody comes and holds you up for your lunch money, that has nothing to do with the rate of inflation. And as Alderman Siegel said, we had a way to take other money we had and pay for lunch anyway, and we didn't opt to do that. 7% of the budget is going to the state pension plans get well fund. We never anticipated that. CAP never anticipated that. And it comes out of everything else we try to do. And we're able to do that. I think it's a miracle that we haven't had worse problems because of that. There was some discussion a little while ago about the healthcare costs. We don't get a choice on those. Those numbers are not, well, this is what we'd like to spend on it. Those are the actual experience of what it costs to keep our workforce well. The way that number is arrived at is we take what we spent last year, we anticipate what the cost will inflate by this year, and then we figure out the working rate. We haven't done that in a couple of years because we had some money put aside that we were able to make it up for with. But that account has been negative every year because we're spending more than we appropriate. And this year, if we don't take care of that and it goes negative, we won't be able to fund it out of the trust fund necessarily. And then we'll be scrambling around at the end of the year looking for real money somewhere else in the budget. We'll be telling the police department, don't hire. We'll be telling the fire department, don't hire. And we'll be transferring that money to pay for things we have to do. We are contractually obligated to pay for health care for our employees. And I submit we want to do that anyway. We have employees, we want them to be healthy. That's money we have no control over. The rest of it, by the time we get past the police department, the fire department, the street department, and teachers, doesn't amount to a hill of beans. The amount that we're in conflict with the cap by, you couldn't cut out of this budget unless we stopped issuing building permits, stopped inspecting buildings, stopped inspecting restaurants, stopped providing public health services, and all of the other things that we do out of the meager part of the budget that's left after that. So, you know, we're pretty much up against the wall. And I just got to do something about that. And the things we've done will take care of that for the moment. You know, and we have dealt reasonably well with the cap in the 20 years that it's been in place. Every once in a while, when stuff happens like that, you need an adjustment that's not in the plan. And that's where we're at. And we're still managing the tax rate to be reasonable, tax rate increases to be reasonably low. We have more real estate coming online. We're going to have 2,000 new units of housing over what we had a couple of years ago. We can tax it. We're going to get a lot of revenue from it. We can't put it towards the services that we require to pay for those new spaces because of the way the cap is structured. So I've gone through the budget a lot, and so have other people, and I'm very familiar with the operation of all of our departments. I can't find this waste. We could look at, are there places where you can deal with teachers, but frankly, I got to caution you against that. I have a lot of insight as to what goes on in the school department because my wife is a paraprofessional. A lot of those classes that look like they have not very many people in them look that way because they have some of the most serious special needs kids in them. And on a yearly basis, the school department is very careful to do that so that the teachers who take on 5 or 6 kids, each of which is supposed to have a dedicated paraprofessional, by the way, and we have one for an entire grade level of 3 classrooms, not one for every kid in the classroom that requires one. But we're careful about at least making the load on the teachers who have those kids lower because those kids require a lot more attention. And, you know, you can do that, and the argument will be raised, well, when I went to school, there were 30 kids in a classroom. When I went to school, there were 30 kids in a classroom. There were 500,000 people in mental institutions in the United States. Instead of mainstreaming kids who had borderline mental problems, we put them away. You know, we don't do that anymore, thank God. And it has an effect on the way our school system works.
Alderman Siegel.
Thank you. Every time I feel like I'm not going to rant anymore, I want to rant a little bit. So Alderman McCarthy touched on a good point, and this is the special ed. Here's the problem. It's not optional. The costs aren't optional. And what's really bad is if you then say, well, we're just going to jack up the number of these special needs kids that each teacher has to handle. That is such a stressful job to begin with, and they'll just leave. At which point, now that one teacher that's gone, so you laid off a teacher that's responsible for that. And now you've increased your cost by a factor of 50 potentially. Literally. It's horrible. Look at the number of ESL students we have. We've got the population of Nashua is different than it was. The rules for how we deal with education and special ed in particular are different, even within the last 10 years. The spending cap is a good concept. It really is. And I'm not saying we don't carefully examine what we spend, but our pockets are being picked by external forces, the electric costs, the SPED costs. SPED transportation, 10% of the students are SPED students. The transportation for them exceeds that cost for the rest of the students. It's astounding. And it's mandatory. So we can't cut. So let's look at all the teachers that are involved in those programs that we can't cut even if we wanted to. And we don't want to. And again, we don't have it. You cannot go in there and say, here's what's going to happen. And again, say, oh, you can cut for the education budget. We don't set the priorities. The Board of Ed will, assuming that they could even make a decision that's acceptable. We could want certain things, but it doesn't matter. In fact, for that matter, we can't set the priorities of Nashua Fire Rescue. We can't set the priorities for the PD by statute. And actually, let's throw Public Works in there too, because there's a Board of Public Works. So the portion of the budget that the Board of Aldermen might have a direct effect over is pretty small. We set the box, and those organizations use the money as they see fit, which may not be anywhere near where we see fit. So again, what I'd like to reiterate is you're going to have an issue with a relatively small matter, a skirmish. You want to fight a skirmish and lose the world war in defense of the skirmish. I'd be very, very cautious about that. I respect the integrity. I'm speaking to my colleague, Alderman Clemens. We do share deeply the concern for the custodians. I've been public about it. You've been public about it. I know them personally, and I care what they do. But this one element, to stand on ceremony on that, it literally is catastrophic. And I almost want to weep. I'm sorry. So there aren't options. There just aren't options.
Alderman Shoneman and then Alderman Clemens.
Thanks. I agree with much of what Alderman Siegel says. I do think there probably are some options. And when I list these numbers, I have not gone to the classroom. I just looked at the spreadsheet that came out of the school budget book. Only place I looked. I don't know who's in those classrooms or what. I just went through those numbers. That's all I'm saying. And if it would ever come to this, we'd have to go through those numbers. And in the end anyway, the school department would do what they want to do. I've heard it said from the school department regarding contracts or regarding budget, we can't decide a budget because the aldermen haven't told us how much we get. They're looking to us to give them the framework and then work within it. And I think that's how government works. And we may not like that's how government works, but it's how it works. Again, I stand on the principle and the process, and I have no place else to stand. The other thing is just regarding what I made the comment about the benefits insurance. We have received similar letters. According to my understanding from Mr. Boudreau, we have received similar letters in the past that we have not done anything with. Maybe we've considered it and said, well, we're not going to raise it. We're going to leave it where it is because we have this fund. And we cannot do that forever, certainly not. But if our economy is going to be turning around, maybe we can do it partially for another year. I don't know. We do have $10 million that can go away in a hurry if we're not careful. And yes, we do have to provide the benefits that we've contracted ourselves to provide. I'm not suggesting that we don't provide them. I'm just saying that we've ignored these instructions or advisements from the underwriting agencies in the past in order to keep things flat. Maybe we can not take the full bite now, but do a little bit now, maybe a little more next year. That's all I'm saying on that. I just make the point that there are some things, and that's all you need to say.
Alderman
Thanks.
Clemens.
Thank you. I wonder if I wonder what the appetite would be of this committee if they knew for a fact that the school board would indeed put those jobs back in place if they receive the money. And what I'm wondering is they've in the past, the Board of Education has asked the Board of Aldermen to weigh in on things. Perhaps we could send them a communication from this committee and ask them that very question. Ask them to take a vote. If the Board of Aldermen adds in $427,000, will you put the 9 full-time equivalent custodians back, and will you put the curriculum supervisor back in the budget? Have them vote on it. If the majority of, if they vote, if they choose not to respond, then they choose not to respond. If they vote on it and it is no, then it's no. If they vote on it and it's yes, then let's try to add some money to the budget. That's my suggestion. If you want to get me to vote for the budget, that would be the way to do it. Send them a communication so that we can get them on record.
Alderman Clemens, I don't think there's anyone here that wants to see anyone laid off. From what I'm hearing from everyone tonight, there's nobody here that wants to see that, but we can't make that call. We can't make that call. Alderman Siegel, did you have your hand up?
You know, one of the assumptions, as we've been discussing this, is that all of the pain falls exclusively on the school department. Well, we all know that's not going to be the case. 100%, the police department's going to take a hit. NFR is going to be taking a hit. DPW is going to be taking a hit. So we think we're saving money, but we're not maintaining stuff. But we also are going to have more of the crime to deal with, and we have the opioid crisis with the safe stations. Guys, you know, what's ultimately going to happen, it sounds like, we have 2 elements that we want to pass. And they'll just vaporize. We'll pass the budget as it is, which is really a shame, because we'll leave the police expendable trust fund for overtime at 0 in the middle of an opioid crisis, which is stupid. It's just stupid, honestly. It's dumb. And then we have the radios. And so, hey, let's not have our fundamental telecommunications infrastructure, which lives depend on, let's not maintain that either. So there's 2 elements that were proposed to increase, both of which I think most of us agree with. Yet all of this nonsense stands on ceremony to a certain extent, or an unfortunate, and I apologize because I'm going to use a term which isn't polite. Irrational, but not irrational in that I don't mean it personally. It's just, it's not a reasonable way to think about what the school board is going to do, no matter what the Board of Aldermen is going to do. It's from direct experience. This borders on insanity to me. I don't know. And there's 15 of us, and you know what? God bless. there should be 15 of us. We have different viewpoints. I'm not saying I'm right. But this one just feels like such a catastrophically crazy, crazy way to go about making decisions. Well, you know, you want to stand on process. Well, we have a process. The process was we went through the budget, okay? And we agree that there's 2 line items. I think my colleague Alderman Shoneman certainly seemed to agree with the 2 line items. What you don't agree with is the process, or somehow. But what does that mean? What does that even mean? I mean, what process got violated? And what process is worth the catastrophe that we cause? The difference between that viewpoint, it's called pragmatism, where you look at what you fundamentally believe and you say, you know, maybe for the greater good of the city, which we all care about. Every single person around here cares about the well, mostly, I think, cares about the greater good of the city. Everyone here tonight certainly does, in their own way. But to stand on ceremony is just oh my God. It reminds me of religious zealots, that no matter what the situation, they're not going to change a point of view because, well, it is what it is. And I'm begging you, literally begging you, to look at the overall effect of those 2 changes in the context of what the budget is, and see they're obviously beneficial. And you just pass the budget, because to not do so is just a catastrophe. Oh. God
Mr.
bless.
Griffin, are we at the point where we've only added 191,000 to the budget? Is that?
Correct.
Because the other 200,000 we moved.
We reduced capital improvements by 200,000 and increased transfers in and out by 200,000.
Right.
That's correct.
Okay, so the only change, really, net change to the budget is 191,000 we added for communications.
Correct.
Thank you. Alderman McCarthy and then Alderman Shoneman.
Money is in the healthcare trust fund at this point.
As of today, there's 11.2 million. We're expecting claims to come in over the next month. Then we do what's called an incurred but not reported adjustment. We're expecting about 10 million in the fund.
And what was it last year?
Last year, I believe, was 13.
So the 3 million increase in the employer contribution to the working rate approximately equals what we lost out of the fund last year.
Correct. It's an attempt to true that up. That's correct.
Mayor, did you want to add to that?
On that point, I think CFO Griffin will confirm that our healthcare expert has suggested that, and our consultant has suggested that it's okay to get it down to 10 million, but you really should not go below that. And when you're self-insured. And so the budget as proposed would get us to, we think, about that $10 million level. And so it's not really optional, or it would be bad practice, unwise, fiscally, to try to save on healthcare, because we end up spending the money, and then we end up spending more than we budgeted, and reduce the trust fund down below where the experts are saying we should maintain it.
Yeah, and I want to make it clear, I'm not disagreeing with what we're doing at all. I think in the past, when we have opted not to necessarily up the working rate to the amount that the consultants gave us, was in years where our actual experience from previous years had not been that bad. We had a few years where we came in well under what was projected. We're not doing that now. We had a lot more money in the account at that point, so we were protected by it. And I think in some years that made sense to do, given, you know, in much the same way as we did with the money for communications. You may be able to put something off for a year in a year where things are tight. And we did that a couple of years with the healthcare fund. This isn't the year to do it, as near as I can tell. We're at the point where that's got to get adjusted. You know, and I guess I would also point out, if we don't change the working rate, which is paid by both us and by the employees, that all of the overage that comes out of the healthcare experience is then picked up by the city, not shared with the employees. So to some extent, it's gonna cost us more if we don't raise the working rate than it would if we didn't.
That's correct.
If I might
That is
add
correct.
one point there, because this is a good history lesson. When I first came in 2010 fiscal, as we prepared for fiscal 12, we did a couple of things. We doubled the contribution that the employee subscribers pay. We went from 10% to 20%. We also introduced some plan design changes to include co-pays from 10 to 20, emergency room visits from 50 to 100. We introduced a deductible, 250 per person, 500 family with a cap on the family. What was interesting was our consultants told us you're going to end up saving more than you could calculate nominally, meaning people are going to make decisions because it's out of pocket. So our claims went down. The claims we had in 2011, and I think it's important to note that this isn't something we decided to do carelessly. The fiscal 11 claims were 34.7 million. They jumped up just before we introduced the plan design to 36.7. Next year, fiscal 13, 35. Fiscal 14, 32.5. Fiscal 15, 33.4. So we've been watching it, and as a consequence, the balance in the fund back in fiscal 11 and 12 was like 12 million. It went up to 17 million. And then the last year of Mayor Lozo and first year of Mayor Donchis, we had to make a conscious decision. Are we going to try to keep this fund as high as it can be and forego other things? I mean, we were asked last year on the stand, how come you're not fully funding SURF? Well, you're 100,000 under the cap. We could probably add 100,000 to the calculation. But so it's been effectively managed, this fund. It is time to make that adjustment. We have 17 unions, very difficult to negotiate plan design because the timing of the contracts expire at different times, and no one really wants to go first. So that's another area where you can introduce plan design. We hear the difference between public sector and private sector. Private sector, you get a notice in the mail that says, by the way, here's your new cost, meaning the premium, and your deductibles going up. We struggle with that. We struggled internally with that because what we ended up with, I think it's important to note, is we had several unions that for various reasons didn't sign. Some of them strategically waited till the agreed upon raise for certain years equaled or exceeded the amount they owed in the premium. So it's been a struggle. You don't want to do it piecemeal. You know, we talked about maybe you bring the deductible from X to Y, and it's going to save 500,000. It's this fund is, you know, if you put everything in together, is about a $44 million fund with Title I, sewer fund, solid waste, and the general fund. So it's been effectively managed to the best extent possible, and we've duly noted that when we've shown the cost drivers of the city, which had the increase in wages, the increase in pension, and the increase or decrease, for that matter, in the benefit side. So, thank you.
Thank you. Did you have your hand up?
Sure,
Alderman?
I'll speak, thank you. I think it has been well managed, certainly not suggesting that it hasn't. I think it's good. I mentioned to Mr. Boudreau when I spoke with him the other day that years ago, way back, I worked in the insurance business. We worked on self-insurance for a number of clients, and I have a sense of how it works, and I like seeing a balance there. I think it's good. My only suggestion prior to hearing the conversation was that we could consider something like that as a way to just delay it a little bit. Instead of 3.6, maybe 1.8. But again, really that conversation is really only going to occur if we don't pass the budget as it is. And my guess is, as Alderman Siegel said, it'll pass as it is. Thanks.
Mayor, and then Alderman McCarthy.
The reason that I would strongly disagree with reducing the healthcare budget and the appropriated or proposed amount of health care is the thing that Alderman McCarthy already mentioned. The working rate is the estimate of the costs for every single employee. And then that gets divided between the employee and the employer. And if we're on a 70-30 situation, we're paying 70, they're paying 30. If it's an employee where it's 80-20, if they have an HMO, then it's 80% the city, 20% the employee. If we reduce the working rate by, say, 1.8 million, or by enough to reduce our budget by $1.8 million, we are also reducing the expenditures made by employees by a smaller figure, but still a significant figure. So we reduce the working rates, they don't have to contribute as much. Then when we hit this projection, and we're 1.8 plus the employees, or say we're 2.5 low, we're only collecting a number that is $2.5 million less than what we're actually spending. We end up, we don't go back, we don't have the right to go back to the employee and say, oh, by the way, could you kick in more money at the end of the year? No. We, the city, make up the over expenditure for the city and for the employee. So in the end, it costs more out of pocket to artificially reduce the working rate. And so that, it's kind of one of those, I mean, it's a little bit complicated, but it's like a penny wise, pound foolish situation. If we're trying to maintain our balance, maintain our long-term ability, long-term spend as little as we reasonably can, it's better to be accurate with the working rate than to go under the working rate, so that we don't pay the employee's share of, we don't pay $500,000 or $600,000 or $700,000 that we would be getting from the employees if we were accurate in terms of our working rate.
Alderman McCarthy?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that and put numbers on it. I mean, even at 20%, every $1 million that doesn't come out of the working rate would be 800,000 otherwise. So the $3 million that we took out of the fund last year would have been 2.4 million if it were in the budget, in the working rate. We spent $600,000 last year that we didn't need to spend because we saved money in the working rate in the budget.
Alderman Siegel and Alderman Schuman.
I'd like to also point out we have an aging workforce. So there's a higher probability that we're going to hit those numbers. So, this is what I'm talking about. I mean, these elements of the budget are a little nuanced. We got to be very careful. Like I can recall Alderman Moriarty saying that the budget was like a pizza pie, and when it's too big, you just kind of reduce it by a certain percent across the board, which was the dumbest thing I've ever heard, because you can't say to your bondholders, hey, we're a little tight, I'm going to pay a little less interest. Good luck. We're now triple F. We'll never raise money again. Those are the types of things. So you end up, when you look at those things that are literally irreducible, state, federal obligations, bond payments, then you have to do your homework. You actually have to go in there and do the work. So these kind of hand-waving gestures are foolish. And that's not happening tonight, I understand. But it has.
Alderman Schoeneman?
Thank you. Yeah, it's certainly not foolish to have the conversations.
No.
I think that's good. And when I came into the meeting tonight, I was thinking, what could I do if someone were to ask? And I appreciate the explanation on how the thing works, and I understand that if we were to lower that working rate, it would take money from, it could impact us more negatively than the seeming benefit. So I understand that, but I think it's good to have those conversations. Again, it's really sort of hypothetical because we're not there. The 3.6 is in the budget, and if it passes, it passes. It's just hypothetical.
Alderman Siegel?
Do you believe there's anybody that thinks that we shouldn't fund the police overtime expendable trust fund, or that we shouldn't keep up our radio infrastructure. Because that's really the two elements that are on the table here, okay? Let's assume that those weren't there. There's still going to be people that can vote against the budget, right? Just because. And, okay. But there has been a lot of homework done. And in fact, I would say I'd give Mayor Donchis a lot of credit because we started the process a lot earlier, and departments were asked to provide an estimate of what would happen if they had to flatline their budget. So we knew well in advance what that would mean. And it was fairly clear in a lot of instances that was completely unacceptable. And there was general agreement that that was unacceptable. Now we're looking at a situation where potentially that was unacceptable, but even going lower is okay because of process or whatever the case may be. So I'm still really confused because I know in my own life there's been instances where I believe something strongly, but that belief carried a consequence with it that was so negative that I had to be a pragmatist and say, all right, well, I know I feel this way, but I'm not willing to cause a much bigger problem. And I just really urge some pragmatism here. And I get, again, there's certain people in the community or whatever that stand on ceremony, and I think there are people that would burn Nashua to the ground just to have the ability to stand on top of the ashes and wave a flag about how they're in defense of the taxpayer. And by the way, I'm not referring to anybody that's in this room.
Alderman Clemmons.
I've made the argument in several different ways. The mayor has made the same argument, did it earlier, about the employees who are being cut on the school side. I've sat here and I've listened to the conversation. I'm not getting the sense that this would get support from anyone in this room. So, I'm left with making that pragmatic choice. I had to make a pragmatic choice last November. I voted for Hillary Clinton. And was certainly the right thing for me to do, in my opinion, considering everything that's happened. It's my personal opinion. But, so when I compare that situation to our budget, I understand what you're saying, Alderman, and I understand what Alderman McCarthy and Alderman Wilshire have expressed, that, in a perfect world, we would be able to tell the school board, this is what we're spending the money on, and restore those jobs. The only, that perfect world doesn't exist, so the only thing that we can do is say, this is the budget that we have. Thank goodness these are the only jobs that are being lost. But if we don't get enough votes for this, because of a lawsuit and the spending cap, the situation could be extremely worse. And that's certainly something that I don't want to see happen. Because unlike some people who may be able to do it, unless I move north, I can't afford to move out of Nashua. I mean, I commute to Cambridge every day. I would love to maybe someday have a house closer to Boston, maybe. But I can't afford it. No way. And that's why a lot of people live in Nashua. That's why a lot of people commute down to Massachusetts every day. Because Nashua is a great city. it's full of people that care about the things that matter, like good schools, a safe environment for their children to grow up, which includes a good police department and a good fire department. We care about good roads. We care about infrastructure. We care about things like, making sure that our trash gets picked up and recycling, and that the streets are cleaned. We're a community that, takes a lot of pride in itself, and we're also a community that values hard work. And I can't say it enough that the positions that are being cut these are hardworking individuals. And the fact that they are being cut out of the budget, out of the school budget, has no reflection on how their work ethic is. And it's also very not reflective of their need. Because I think that there's going to be negative consequences to cutting those positions. And, they're not going to show up overnight, but they're going to build, because it's stuff that builds up over the years. And it's little things here, it's little things there. And eventually, you look around and you say, geez, maybe if we had 9 more people, we could have prevented this from happening. So, with all that being said, I struggle with my decision, because I want to stand on principle, and I want to say that no, I won't support a budget that lays people off. But I have done it in the past. In fact, it was with 10 part-time custodians. It's always the custodians. And, I came before the budget committee, and that was in 2008 or 2009. And I came before the budget committee and I pleaded, like I did tonight, we should add these back in. Let the school board be the one to make the decision that they're not going to fund these jobs. Let the school board make the decision that they're the ones that are going to turn their backs on the maintenance of our schools. And to no avail. So once again, here we are, about 10 years later, and we're doing the same thing. And, the schools haven't shrunk, the population hasn't gone down. So I think that's a shame. I'm going to think long and hard about the decision that I'm going to make voting for the budget. Like I thought long and hard about the decision I was going to make in the presidential election. I just want the custodians to know, and the curriculum supervisor to know, that if I vote for the budget, it is not because I agree with the fact that the school board has cut your jobs. And it's for the greater good of the city, in that I don't want to see more of your colleagues laid off because of an awful lawsuit that subverts the will of the majority of this board. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Clemmons. Alderman McCarthy.
Yeah, so I think we only had about half of that discussion. Your original proposal was we should put the money conditionally back in case that was what they wanted to spend it on. And I think, I have done precisely that, and I will tell you that our lawyer, their lawyer, and perhaps the courts, I don't remember what exactly happened with it, held that that was in fact in violation of our responsibilities under the charter. And so I don't, I just don't think that's a reasonable way to do it. I don't think anybody here has said they wouldn't vote for the increase to put it back if that's what it were going to be spent on. I think the point was we don't know what the Board of Ed would do. So perhaps someone, you might want to do this, should transmit a request to the Board of Ed of, is that what they would do?
I asked this, I'm not on this committee, but I asked this committee if they would send a request to the Board of Education formally from this committee to say exactly that. I'm not on the committee. I can't make that motion.
You can send them the letter, Alderman Clemmons, and you can make
So can the committee.
a motion to increase the budget if the answer comes back. And yeah, we could ask. I mean, it would be best if it came from the chair, who unfortunately isn't here at the moment. We can, in fact, ask that question.
We can do that.
I would strongly suggest it.
We can ask. Alderman Siegel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I'm sorry to say that that's not what they're going to do. They've spent the last 2 to 3 years being actively hostile towards the custodians. So it's not going to happen. And I think we can all acknowledge that. It won't happen. They'd be happy to take the money, though.
If I might, the reason I didn't propose doing it is I have had that conversation with members of the Board of Ed and gotten the impression that it was not their first use for money if there were additional funds.
Alderman Clemmons?
I have as well. But it would be nice to have them on some kind of formal record saying that.
They actually have on numerous occasions and publicly said they don't want to spend that money. And I've had the conversations with them, and it's been painful. In fact, there was a piece of legislation, I think some of us remember, that the school board wanted, and we basically, or it was a finance committee element, and we said, man, we're not going to pass this because of the custodians. I mean, it was a real showdown. And that was amazing. And they're just as militant as you could possibly be. So it wasn't changing their mind. In fact, it did exactly the opposite. So this is what I'm just telling you in the reality. And so believe me, it didn't make me real popular, having done that, being the point person for making the statements at the time. And I just want to say I appreciate, Alderman Clemmons, your willingness to have listened here and to consider that. And sometimes I certainly understand you're voting for Hillary Clinton. It's pretty hard to argue that point, but that be that as it may. I'm not going to say one way or the other. We all, anyway. But there's a pragmatism that and I'm glad that you're willing to consider it, because you won't get the votes for in this board. You absolutely won't get what you want out of the school board, but the catastrophe still looms. So please, please, please go with your stated instinct to reconsider for the pragmatic reasons, and you've already stated your feelings, which I think we echo. Thank you.
Mayor?
Well, I agree with Alderman Clemmons regarding the importance of the custodians. I mean, the school buildings, and Alderman McCarthy could help estimate, but I mean, it's like $1 billion worth of assets we have there. If you put it all together, current costs to replacement costs. And, I, like Alderman Siegel, Alderman Clemmons, said clearly that I thought the privatization effort was a mistake. And really, after listening to Alderman Clemmons, that was kind of the reason that I included that in the calculation of what I had said. I would where I would go with the school departments or the superintendent's original budget. And so, I mean, I think he makes a convincing case. I mean, there was when I was on the Board of Aldermen, more like Alderman Clemens' age. Before I was mayor the first time, there was a guy on the Board of Aldermen, Fred Goodspeed, from Ward 4, who was a school custodian. And he always called it maintenance, is what he called it, not maintenance. He was a very good guy, and he was very persuasive as to the importance of the maintenance at the school. I think he worked at Elm Street, of the various school buildings. And I think it is an important issue. I mean, we got a huge, but what I'm worried about is from the letter is they're not going to answer us anytime soon. That takes them like they debate things forever. It seems like where they're back to competency grading for the 10th time. So I don't know. I mean, are we really going to get them to tell us within a reasonable time? And we would like to address the budget by the end of the fiscal year. That's my only reservation about it. Anyway,
Further discussion?
wouldn't hurt to try, I guess. But
Do we have a
I hope we
motion on
don't
the floor?
delay the
We
budget.
do not have a motion on the floor. Alderman Siegel.
I'd like to pass I'd like first to take the budget off the table.
Motion is to take Resolution 17098 from the table. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. Alderman
I'd like to
Siegel.
propose amending the budget with the two items that we have previously voted on. One, to take $200,000, which was initially earmarked for citizens' participation, and to transfer that to the Police Overtime Expendable Trust Fund. The second is to restore the line item that we voted on for the,
I think we've already done those.
we
Yeah.
did those?
Yeah.
We did both.
Oh, okay, then I propose that we pass the budget as amended.
Alderman Schoenman, sorry.
Okay. I just want to point out that making that change, you did correctly say that I would support both of those changes, but it requires the budget now passed by 10 votes, those two items being in there. You know that, right? I mean, is that, okay. So, all right, it's fine. I won't support the budget, but I did support that change. Is there any, I think I know the answer to the question, is there any will on this board to make any further reductions in the school budget? I don't think so.
I
That's
don't
fine.
think so.
All right.
Further discussion? The motion is to, did you move for final passage of the budget
Yeah, I'm sorry, yes, I'd like to move for final passage.
as amended?
As amended, by roll call.
Okay. Motion before us is to recommend final passage of Resolution 17098 as amended. The clerk, any further discussion on that motion? The clerk would please call the roll.
Okay, Alderman Wilshire.
Yes.
Alderman McCarthy.
Yes.
Alderman O'Brien's not here. Alderman Schoenman, no. Alderman Siegel.
Yes.
Alderman McGinnis. That motion carries 3-2.
Okay, thank you. Anything further? Alderman Clemens?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody here tonight for indulging me, mostly, but I think we had some good discussion about the history of some of this stuff and how we've arrived at the situation that we're at. And I am thankful for the committee's indulgence, and I appreciate everything. So, and I will take into consideration everything that's been said.
Thank you, Alderman Clemens. Mayor?
I'd like to say that I very much respect the role of the Budget Committee and the Board of Aldermen in the budget making. I understand that sometimes you have a different judgment than I do regarding various items. I'm used to that, sometimes budgets get changed. I did two things I thought to try to help you this time. Number one, I moved it back. I proposed the budget at the, the second meeting in April as opposed to the first meeting in June, to kind of give a little more time so you're not here every night till 10 o'clock. And also, I tried to put in some explanation in the budget narratives to give people a better sense of what these departments are doing and what they've accomplished. And that was more. The aldermen are more familiar with that, but it's sort of. But I think it helps the aldermen too, especially the newer ones. If I can, I will move the budget back another 2 weeks next year. I mean, what I'd like to do is get it proposed by the first meeting in April to give you then, more like 2.5 months to consider it, so you don't have to stay out. I know how difficult it is to be here every night at 10 o'clock when you're jamming the budget into a few weeks. So anyway, I respect the role of the committee. I appreciate all the work that you've done this year and in prior years, and I'm willing to try to make your job easier, and I will, try to follow through on that.
Thank you, Mayor, and I do appreciate not being here until 11 o'clock at night. I appreciate getting the budget earlier and having more time to work on it. It's taken a little bit of the stress out of the budget. Is there anything else anyone would like to discuss this evening? No? Public comment? There is none. Remarks by Alderman? Alderman Shorman.
Just a couple things. This Saturday, there's the Motor Mania on Main Street. I think that's the Saturday it's being held. It's a great chance to get out and see what's going on with some of the engine guys here in the city. Also at the airport, too, there's an event. The New Hampshire Aviation Museum is hosting an event. They're based in Manchester. They're hosting an event at the Nashua Airport to show off planes and motors and motorcycles and cars, that kind of thing, too. So it kind of ties in with the Motor Mania, but it's down at the airport. Two separate venues for the same kind of event this coming Saturday. Thanks.
Sounds like fun.
It will be.
Anything else? No need for non-public. Do we have a motion? Alderman Segal.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion is to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And we are adjourned at 8:43. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Mr. Griffin.